Okay, so moving further with economics, next topic is monetary and fiscal policy. So before we start the topic, let's understand the difference between monetary and fiscal policy. So remember, monetary policy have two tools: money supply and interest rate. A policy related to changing money supply or interest rate is monetary policy. A policy related to changing government spending or taxes is fiscal policy. Monetary policy relates to central bank. Fiscal policy relates to government. Any problem so far up till here? And interest rate, discount rate. Any policy can either be expansionary or contractionary. Expansionary policy is the one which is focused on increasing the or pacing up the economy or speeding up the economy or increasing the GDP growth. Contractionary is the one which is focused on reducing the pace of economy. If you think economy is booming and economy is going out of control, or if it is being heated up, then you contract it or you control it to take it back to stability. So any policy can either be expansionary or contractionary. Any problem so far? Okay, moving on. Let's first start with the very basic definitions. So first let's start with the definition of money. When we define money, money can have a narrow definition and a broad definition. So money can be defined as narrow money or broad money. So when I say money, what is money? Money is something through which I can buy something or sell something, or which I can exchange a good or service with. So narrow means that you only include the most liquid forms of money, like for example coins, notes, etc. If you also include some lesser liquid form like short-term investments or those, then it becomes a broad money. So difference between narrow and broad is that narrow includes most liquid ones, and broad also include somewhat lesser liquid form of money as well. And definitions are given here, so you can just go through the definitions, just read it once, and I think that should be fine later. And within different countries, the definition of narrow and broad money or money measures are different, but overall concept is same. Narrow means including most liquid ones, broad means including somewhat less liquid as well. In US you have M1 major, M2 major. So M1 is narrower major, M2 is a broader major. In UK you have M0, M2, M4, M3H. So this would be the narrowest, and then a bit broad, a bit broader, and then the broadest. So this is how money is measured. This is just to tell you that how is money measured, or what are these terminologies. Just go through that one to build your understanding. Now next question is that how is money created, or what is the money creation process? So one of the key tools to create money is fractional reserve banking. What is fractional reserve banking? Let's say there is a depositor who deposited $100 in a bank A. So this $100 is the money owned by X, and it is the money with A as well. Now let's say A gives this $100 on lending to another bank B, or from this 100 it gives $90 to B. Now B also have money, so that means money has multiplied itself, money has increased. Now let's say B gives $80 from it to C for lending. Now C also have some money, so A has money, B has money, C has money. This is how money will continue to be multiplied. This is known as fractional reserve banking, that a particular portion will be kept as reserve and rest would be given to someone else, and money will be created, and then next party would reserve something and then give it forward. Now this money creation would depend, or a significant factor impacting this money creation would be reserve requirement. What is this reserve requirement? So for example, there is a requirement that at least 10% should be kept as reserve and 90% can be lended. So here, yes. Yes. So for example, here A reserved 10% and lended $90, right? So this is a, for example, this is a, because this is a requirement of 10%. Then it lended 80, then it's 70. So that means if I increase reserve requirement, then this amount being lended forward will decrease, correct? So and if this amount decreases, then money creation will decrease. So that means if reserve requirement increases, money creation will decrease. If reserve requirement decreases, money creation will increase. Why? Due to fractional reserve banking. That is one of the ways in which money is created. So that is how money, that is known as money creation process. So if your reserve requirement is 10%, so you are allowed to lend 90% of the money. So how much money will be created if you invest $1 today? So from $1, the amount of money created would be 1 divided by 0.1. So how do you measure the amount of money being created? Remember, it is 1 divided by reserve requirement. So 1 divided by reserve requirement would be 1 divided by 0.1, and 1 divided by 0.1 would be 10, correct? So that means every $1 will change into $10. So money 10 times money would be created. This factor is known as money multiplier. So money multiplier is 1 divided by reserve requirement. This means with every $1 invested, $10 will be created. With every $100 invested, $1,000 will be created eventually.
Money created is a number.
Money created is the factor with which money will create. So for example, if I invest $1, how much money will be created? $10. That is money multiplier. So for every $1, the amount of money being created is money multiplier. So that means 1 will be multiplied into $10 in the economy. Moving on, discussing money further and moving to quantity theory of money. What is quantity theory of money? Quantity theory of money says that money supply into velocity. Velocity means number of times that money changes hand. So it reflects the circulation of money in the economy. So it says money supply into velocity equals price levels in the economy multiplied by real output. This is quantity theory of money. Quantity theory of money says MV equals PY. What is, yes, money supply, velocity. Velocity means number of times the money changes hands. So how many times will it be used to purchase or sell something? Equals price into real output. This is quantity theory of money. Output, real output. Real output multiplied by price would be nominal output. Price into real output would be nominal output. So moving on to another concept, money neutrality. What is money neutrality? Money neutrality says that in this equation MV equals to PY, V and Y are constant. It says V and Y wouldn't change, and if V and Y are constant, if these two are constant, then increase in money supply will lead to increase in price. So money neutrality says that any increase in money supply will lead to increase in price, and any decrease in money supply will lead to decrease in price. Why? Because it believes that velocity and Y will be constant in short term. So any increase in money supply will lead to increase in price. So that's why we say that increase in money supply will lead to inflation, or decrease in money supply leads to drop in inflation. The reason is this equation of MV equals to PY, which says that if money supply increases, price will increase. Now the question is that if money supply is increasing or decreasing, how do central bank control money supply? That is, increase money supply or decrease money supply. But even yes. So now the question is that how do central bank increase or decrease money supply? There are two possibilities. One, you change the reserve requirement. and another is through open market operations. What do we mean by open market operation? Central bank, for example, goes to the economy, goes to market and buy back bonds. When central bank buy back bond, what would central bank give in return? Money. So that's how money supply will increase in economy. So
when you say that the central bank is printing money, it basically
it is buying back the bonds. Yes, that is quantitative easing. So quantitative easing is buying back bond, printing more money and injecting it into the market. Or if it wants to reduce money supply, it will issue bond. It will issue bond and take the money from investors. So money supply in market or in economy will be reduced. So bond buyback or bond selling are open market operation, and this bond buyback is bond buyback is also known as quantitative easing. So these are open market operations to increase the money supply, or you can change reserve requirement as well.
if you increase the reserve requirement, that will
Money supply will decrease, and if you decrease reserve requirement, money supply will increase. So if there is more money in the economy, that means people have more cash. So value. So if they have more cash, they will be able to spend more. If they spend more, price will increase, and price will increase, and value of money will fall. That previously with $100 you could purchase one cup maybe, so 1 unit maybe. Now with $100, now maybe you need $120 to purchase the same cup. So price has increased, cup has remained be one, but price has increased. Why? Because as there is more amount of money in the economy, so more is being spent into buying something. Purchasing power will reduce. So equilibrium nominal. Moving on to interest rate. So interest rate is the rate at which borrowing and selling will be done. So how is interest rate found, or what is the equilibrium interest rate? Equilibrium interest rate is the one at which money demand equals money supply. So there is some demand in the money for the money. There is some supply of the money. The point at which money demand and supply intersects, that is known as equilibrium interest rate. The interest rate at which demand will equal supply will be equilibrium interest rate. Okay, so now the question is that if we are talking about demand and supply, what causes demand or what creates demand? We know how the supply is created. Central bank buying back bond, issuing bond. And what creates demand for money, or what are the motives for having money or holding money? So generally there are three types of motives to hold money: transaction related, precautionary and speculative. Transaction related means that you expect to do a transaction in future. You expect that you will have to pay some fees. You expect that you will have to buy a car or something. For that transaction, you are keeping money with you, or you are demanding money. Precautionary, that is, you expect you are keeping some funds with you, some cash with you, because you think that something sudden can come up. Maybe you have someone fall ill, or maybe something like some accident happens, due to which you are keeping some money as precaution. Speculative, for example, you think that in future money will increase value. For example, USD will increase in value, so you are taking more. You think in future it will reduce value, so you are investing it rather than keeping it, putting it into bond or anything. So these are the three major motives which for holding money. And if they are the motive of holding money means that you will demand money. So demanding money or demand of money and holding the money is same thing. So this is what drives the demand for money. Precaution means that you are keeping money to meet some transactions. So for example, any accident can happen anytime. Maybe someone falls ill anytime. So due to that, you are keeping some money with you. You do not know whether money will increase in value or decrease in value, but as a precaution, you are keeping some cash. You do not want to invest all of it. So that is precautionary.
transaction related.
Transaction related, when you expect a transaction, you know that you have to buy a car. For that, you are keeping money. because you will buy a car. You know you have to pay some interest on something. You are keeping money to pay that
This is the
interest.
same as that equation saving or
Saving
gross consumption plus saving
GDP.
no, the holding money is saving money, right?
So either you hold it means you demand it, or you save it. Save it means that you put into the bank account, invest. If savings are increasing, that means demand is not increasing, supply is increasing, money supply is increasing. Because you when save more, your demand decreases, supply increases. And the equilibrium at which demand and supply meets, that is your consumption and saving meets, that is the interest rate at which that is the equilibrium interest rate. Moving on to nominal rate and real rate. So what is a real interest rate? As we have discussed it multiple times, real means excluding inflation. If you add inflation to real, it becomes nominal. This formula gives you an approximate number for nominal. An accurate number would be 1 plus nominal rate equals 1 plus real rate multiplied by 1 plus expected inflation. This will give you the accurate answer, but this will give you an approximate answer. Anyway, nominal means real plus inflation. So Fisher effect says that nominal rate is equal to real interest rate plus and expected inflation. That is inflation which is expected in the market. This is nominal interest rate. Any problem so far? That is Fisher effect. Sorry.
Unexpected
We are coming on to it. So this is Fisher effect. But in reality, when we talk about nominal rate, there will be real rate. There is expected inflation which is making nominal rate. But then maybe there happen to be some unexpected inflation as well. This is expected. Maybe some unexpected also coming. So that means some premium is usually built in for unexpected inflation as well. So your nominal rate may build a premium for unexpected inflation as well. So if you are in an economy where uncertainty is high, then there will be this premium will be high. If you are in an economy where certainty is high or stable, which is stable, then this premium will be negligible or zero. So otherwise, nominal interest rate will build in some premium for unexpected inflation as well, not only expected inflation. But this is Fisher effect, which says that there is real rate and expected inflation premium. In reality, there will be some unexpected premium as well. So what are the three components of nominal rate? Three components are required real return, expected inflation component, and risk premium to compensate for uncertainty. Now the question is, what are the key roles of central bank? What should central bank do? What are the objectives? So key roles are monopoly supplier of currency. It is the only supplier of currency. Banker to government and bankers bank. So it is the bank for banks. If banks want to borrow, they go to central bank. Lender of last resort. If banks are not able to lend, they do not have money, then it is as last resort central bank can lend. Regulator and supervisor of the payments system. Conductor of monetary policy and supervisor of the banking system. Remember all these roles. If you are asked which one of the following is a role or which one of the following is not a role, you should be able to identify it. So remember these roles. Secondly, now next question is that what should be the objective of a monetary policy? So we discussed that monetary policy is related to money supply and interest rate. So we discussed monetary policy is related to money supply and interest rate. In money supply, we discussed you can either do open market operations, that is you go and buy and sell bond, or you can also impact it through reserve requirement. In interest rate, you can increase or decrease the discount rate. Question is that what is the objective of monetary policy? What are you actually trying to achieve with this monetary policy? So there can be many objectives. You want to pace up growth, you want to control growth and different objectives. But key objective of any monetary policy is, remember, price stability. So remember, key objective of any monetary policy is price stability. There can be many purposes or objectives, but key objective is price stability. Remember this. Okay, so done. Okay. So now the next question is that if there is an inflation in the economy, if prices are going up, what would it cause, or if there is expected inflation? Expected inflation. Inflation can be of two types as we discussed, expected and unexpected. If there is expected inflation, what can be the cost of that inflation? So there can be two types of cost or two terminologies used with respect to cost: shoe leather cost and menu cost. Shoe leather cost means that number of transactions will increase. You will have to withdraw money again and again from the bank, and when you have to withdraw money, your shoe leather will be used and you will have your shoe leather will be deteriorated. So that's how they arrive at this terminology. It simply means that you will have to make more visits to institutions to withdraw money or to make transaction. Expected inflation, because it is expected, but you will actually withdraw it, or you will actually go and make the transaction when the need arises. So as prices are changing, today price was 100, next day price becomes 120. You wouldn't keep 120 as of today. When it becomes 120, then you go and take out money. So although it is expected, there are still costs. Menu cost, which means printing the menus. So simply means that your prices will need to be revised again and again. When you revise a price, you need to do some working, you need to do some publicity, you need to change packaging, and so everything will change. And the cost of printing, reprinting those menus are menu cost. So this is for expected inflation. Why? Because you expect it, but still, if you know that price after 1 month, the cost will increase after 1 month, and next month I will be selling product for 110. But you cannot put 110 in today's menu. In today's menu, your product should be at 100 because you are selling it for 100. So it is expected, but still some cost associated with it. Then there are costs for unexpected inflation. And remember, these are very little cost or not so significant or not causing any significant impact. But unexpected inflation causes significant impact. Unexpected inflation leads to change in wealth distribution. So for example, there is a borrower who has borrowed money, and there is a lender who has lended in. Let's say lender has lended $100. For simplicity, let's ignore the coupon payments in between and all that. And at the maturity, borrower will return $100. And in between, they have settled, so they know what is the expected inflation. And due to that expected inflation, they have covered that expected inflation in interest rate. That is, due to expected inflation, money will lose value. And if money loses value, that is covered in interest rate which this lender will get. But let's say now some unexpected inflation happens. When unexpected inflation happens, money will lose more value. When money loses value, borrower makes a payment with a lower value money. Borrower is still making the same payment, but now that payment is worth less. So that means borrower is at a benefit and lender is at a loss. So wealth transfers from lender to borrower in terms of unexpected high inflation. So unanticipated inflation can be bad for the economy, and if there is an economy in which there is unexpected inflation, or unexpected inflation is a usual thing, then obviously lender will charge an extra premium on interest, and so interest cost will be higher. So borrowing cost also increases due to unexpected inflation. So what are the key impact of unanticipated unexpected inflation? Lead to inequitable transfers of wealth, give rise to risk premia in borrowing rates and the prices of other assets, and reduce the information content of market prices. You do not know whether market prices have incorporated the future inflation or not. There is anything unexpected can happen anytime. So information content in those prices is low. So if you expect an unexpected inflation to be high, if you are in an economy where unexpected inflation is high, you will charge an extra premium, and so borrowing cost will be higher. Okay, so that is an introduction to money. Now moving on, monetary policy tools. What are the monetary policy tools? Again, something that we have already discussed. So how do you come up with monetary policy? Either through open market operation, or through policy rate, which is interest rate or discount rate, or through reserve requirement. So this is so this is something that we have already discussed: open market operation, policy rate, and reserve requirement. If you want to have an expansionary policy, you buy back bonds, you decrease interest rate, and you decrease reserve requirement. Yes, discount rate. So policy rate is the rate that is discount rate, which is set by the central bank. Then on that some premium is added and it becomes interbank borrowing rate, and then some other premium is added, then it becomes lending rate, and so on. So this is the base rate or the minimum rate set by the central bank, also known as discount rate in practical world. So if you want to have expansionary policy, then you buy back bond or decrease policy rate or decrease reserve requirement. If you have contractionary policy, then you either issue bonds, by sell I mean issue bond, or increase the rate or increase the reserve requirement. Why rate? Because if you increase rate, people will save more and spend less. When they spend less, aggregate demand will reduce. Why lower rate? Because if you decrease the rate, people will save less and invest or consume more. When they consume more, overall demand will increase. Something which we have already discussed. Qualities of effective central bank. What is the effective central bank, or what are the qualities? So it should be credible, it should be independent, and it should be transparent. Credible and transparent are very obvious or very clear. Credible means that it should be trustworthy. People should have a trust on it. Transparent means it should show all the information transparently, not hiding the information. Independence means that it should be independent from the influence of government. So sometimes central bank might come under the influence of government. So if a central bank is not dependent on government, or is not under the influence of government, or does not need government's sign off on everything or on anything, and it can freely take its policy or come up with its policy and implement it, then that central bank is known as independent. So with respect to independent, there can be two types of independence: target independent and policy independent. Target independent means that central bank is independent, can independently set the target. That target will not be influenced by the government. And policy independent means that central bank can come up with the policy of its own. It wouldn't be dictated by the government. So for a central bank to be completely independent, it should be target independent as well as policy independent. Both at same time. So maybe some central bank is target independent but not policy. Maybe some have its policy but not target. So for a complete independence, central bank, the best scenario is that central bank is completely independent of government. Otherwise, it will be influenced by government, and government would take decisions which might impact the long-term economy, because government would be focused on getting the votes. So maybe near elections, they force the central bank to take some decisions which are not in the favor of the economy. Which we have discussed that policy can be expansionary or contractionary. We also discussed that for expansionary and contractionary, one of the key tools is policy rate. That is, you reduce policy rate for expansion and you increase policy rate for contraction. But now the question is, increase from which level or decrease from Which level? So there will be certain level, let's say R. At this level, economy will neither expand nor contract. This level is known as neutral rate. So neutral rate of interest is that base level at which economy will neither expand nor contract. If you increase it beyond this, then economy will contract. If you decrease it beyond this, then economy will expand. Now the question is, how do you calculate this neutral rate of interest, or what is this neutral rate of interest actually? So neutral rate of interest is trend growth plus inflation target. So overall growth, long-term growth plus inflation target. This is neutral rate. If your policy rate is greater than neutral rate, economy will be, monetary policy is set to be contractionary. Otherwise, it is set to be. If it is lower, then policy rate is lower than neutral rate, then it is set to be expansionary. So there obviously there will be certain equilibrium rate in the economy from which you increase it to contract and decrease it to expand.
Trend growth है, GDP growth है.
Long term potential growth. So the key concept is that you will at least need a return of the equal to the real growth, and in addition to that you will need a return for the to offset the target inflation. If these two are happening, you are at normal level. If you increase it beyond this, then it will slow down, economy will slow down, because people will save more than they should. And if you decrease it beyond this, below this, then people will save lesser than they should, and so economy will spur. So this we have discussed central bank policy rate. Discussed within policy rate, some of the key terms are base rate, federal funds rates, and repo. Just remember the definitions. Base rate is the reference rate on which a commercial bank bases lending rate to the customer. For example, KIBOR, LIBOR, these interbank offer rate. These are base rates. Federal fund rate is the interbank rate on one night or one day borrowing. So the rate on one day borrowing, if one bank is borrowing from another bank overnight, that is known, the rate on that is known as federal funds rate. Repo is repurchase agreement. That is, if let's say party A sells something X, sell asset X to B, with the agreement that it will buy it back after 2 days, 3 days, 7 days, whatever period, that is known as repurchase agreement, and the rate on that repurchase agreement is known as repo rate. So just remember the terminologies. Policy rate is the reference rate, then all these rate will be built using the policy rate. Reserve requirement we have discussed. This chart tells you that how does actually policy rate impacts the overall inflation. Repo is a general term. It can happen between banks, or it can happen between investors, or anywhere. Here they are only talking about the repo in a specific context of money market repo. That is repo on money market instrument between banks. So if you change the policy rate, this is policy rate. If you change the policy rate, market prices will change, asset prices will change. Why? Because asset price have some discount rate. If that discount rate changes, price will change. Expectations and confidence about the future will change, exchange rate will change. So if you, for example, increase the rate, prices will go down. Expectation will be of slowdown in future, people will save more. Exchange rate, generally if you increase rate, then exchange rate increases. The assumption is that your currency will become attractive and more money flow into the economy. But it is not that simple. There are other factors as well. So maybe increase in rate leads to decrease in GDP, and when GDP growth decreases, then exchange rate deteriorates or depreciates. So not always, but yes, key assumption is that if there is increase in rate, that would lead to exchange rate increase. Domestic, this all would impact domestic demand. So domestic demand would generally increase, decrease in prices. Sorry, we assumed increase in rate. So increase in rate, lower domestic demand. This and impact the net external demand. Why exchange rate will impact the demand for export and import. This will impact total demand. Total demand would impact the total inflationary pressures. That is, if total demand is increasing, inflation will increase. If total demand is decreasing, inflation will decrease. That's how it flows to inflation. So if you have decreased it, then eventually you can expect an inflation, higher inflation. If you have increased it, you can expect a lower inflation in future, primarily due to demand. To summarize, central bank's policy rate economy, where so how does it work? Short-term interest rate, change in value of asset prices, exchange rate, and expectation of economic agent. These factors cause the demand to change and eventually cause the inflation to change. This we have discussed: independence, credibility, and transparency. Exchange rate targeting. Exchange rate targeting simply means that there are many developing countries which choose to operate monetary policy by targeting their currency's exchange rate rather than an explicit level of domestic inflation. So there are two ways we discussed that for price stability you can target an inflation. While there will be some economies targeting inflation, there might be some economies who do not target explicitly inflation, but rather target the exchange rate, that they want to maintain a certain exchange rate against the other countries. That is known as exchange rate targeting. That is, for example, any country targeting exchange rate against US dollar, that it wants to keep a certain exchange rate. Expansionary and contractionary we have discussed. Neutral rate we have discussed. Sources of inflation we discussed in previous topic. It can be due to demand or it can be due to supply. If it is due to demand, it is known as demand shock. If it is due to supply changes, it is known as supply shock. Moving on to limitations of monetary policy. That what are the limitations of monetary policy? Is it so easy to achieve the objective of monetary policy? So remember that key limitation is that maybe it is difficult, or maybe at times central bank is not able to achieve the objectives of monetary policy. So one example can be, let's say that central bank raises short-term rates. Why does it raise short-term rate? It expected that if it raises short-term rate, yields on the bonds will increase, right? So that is the core purpose. That is that eventually yields increase, and so people sell off the bonds to get the higher yields. But when it increases short-term rates, investors thought that rates are already too high. So investors thought that that this will trigger a recession. Why? Because they thought that rates are already high, so they thought that this will trigger a recession. And when there will be a recession, central bank will cut down the rate, so interest rate will go down in future. So investors thought that in future rate will go down, and they know that when rate goes down, prices goes up. So they think that in future prices will go up. So in the anticipation of higher prices in future, they started buying bonds. When they bought bonds, prices went up and yield dropped, because yield is inversely related to price. So central bank wanted to actually increase the yield in the economy, but it eventually led in decrease of yield. So that means there are many factors, and maybe at times monetary policy is not able to achieve its objective. That is the limitation of monetary policy. Bond market vigilantes, what is this term? So if there is an if there is high inflation in an economy, and if some investors think that inflation is out of control, they would demand higher premium for that inflation, right? When they demand higher premium over that inflation, they would want high yield. And when do yield increase? Yield increase when prices decrease. And how will prices decrease? Prices will decrease when they cut down the demand for long-term bonds. So some investors may cut down demand for long-term bonds to push up the yield to incorporate the inflation, out of control inflation expectation. That is, those are known as bond market vigilantes. Quantitative easing we have discussed, that is expansionary policy in which you reduce interest rate and print more money. By printing means you go and buy back bonds. So this is monetary policy. When we started the topic, we discussed two types of policies, monetary policy and fiscal policy. Monetary policy we discussed is related to central bank, and the tools that we discussed were interest rate and money supply. And within money supply, we discussed reserve requirement and we discussed open market operations. Any confusion so far? Fiscal policy we discussed is related to government, and we discussed that it is related to government spending and taxes. So policies by government related to spending and taxes are known as fiscal policies. Again, fiscal policy can either be contractionary or expansionary. Contractionary means for slowdown. So reducing government spending or increasing taxes is a contractionary policy. On the other hand, increasing government spending and reducing taxes is an expansionary policy. Now, policy or fiscal tools can be of two types: discretionary tools and automatic stabilizers. So, for example, government plans to build a hospital. That is at government's discretion. Government plans to make a road. That is at government's discretion. That is discretionary tool. Maybe it do it today, maybe it do it after 1 year. So as per its discretion, it will take the decision and do it. Automatic stabilizers are those which automatically try to stabilize economy, the demand. How? For example, social welfare benefits or unemployment benefits. When unemployment increases, your aggregate demand falls. When your aggregate demand falls, government would want to increase government spending to uplift it again. So this unemployment benefit, what it do is that it will increase. When unemployment increases, it will automatically increase. When unemployment benefit automatically increases, aggregate demand will automatically increase, because this is a spending. So that means government spending here would automatically increase when there is a need for it, or will automatically decrease when there is no need for it. That is known as automatic stabilizer. For example, social security benefits, unemployment benefits and all. Discretionary is, that is at the discretion of government. Okay.
Automatic stabilizer still need the policy.
Yeah, so there will be a policy, but it will automatically change. Its output or its spending will automatically change with change in economy.
Maybe it's a discretionary, but
Policy is discretionary, but it will automatically change. So government will not actually decide to now make the investment or not make the investment. Whenever there is a need, automatically it will increase. Whenever there is no need, automatically it will decrease. For example, value added tax. So if you have made tax slabs or something, then as consumption increases, automatically tax will increase, and as consumption decreases, tax will decrease.
balancing income would be it's an automatic stabilizer.
It would be automatic stabilizer. Any support programs are generally automatic stabilizer because their use or their spending will increase at the point when it is more required or needed. Okay, so moving on, government is spending something and government is getting tax. So this is spending and this is revenue. correct? The difference between this revenue and spending is known as budget, surplus or deficit. If taxes are greater than government spending, it is known as surplus. If spending is greater than tax, then it is known as budget deficit. When there is a budget deficit, government borrows debt to finance it, and that increases the risk of the overall economy. Now the question is that how do you analyze that risk? How much debt is fine and what amount of debt is more risky or what amount of debt is less risky? So you gauge it through debt to GDP ratio. If borrowing debt is leading to increase in GDP at a higher rate than borrowing, that then that is not so risky. But if you are borrowing debt but your GDP is increasing at a very low rate, then that is more risky. So debt to GDP ratio helps you analyze the riskiness or the solvency risk of an economy. So it helps you analyze solvency risk of an economy. Now the question is what debt to GDP ratio is okay, fine and what not. So generally it is assumed that for developing markets 65% GDP debt to GDP ratio is fine, and for developed markets 90% or 95% GDP debt to GDP ratio is considered okay. So for developed 90 to 95 is considered okay, or 90 or 85 is considered okay, and for developing 65% is considered okay, because you have that but you have such a large GDP to pay for it. Otherwise if it increases, if it is increasing at a higher rate than GDP, then that is a problem. Now when we talk about debt to GDP ratio, there are some economists who say that debt to GDP ratio is useful and should be used. There are some others who say that it is not useful and it should not be considered or used. Or some economists say that borrowing debt is useful, and some others say that debt should not be borrowed. And what are their arguments?